All right, guys, we're gonna do a little something different. I wanted to really kind of educate everybody on the story of Pappy Van Winkle. So we actually just received and unboxed a few new bottles. So we've got this. What's up, Grandpa? How you doing, buddy? Haven't seen you in a while. We got this one in. Let's see, we've got the old Rip Van Winkle 10. Don't call this Pappy Van Winkle, by the way. Another thing I've seen people get mad about. This is just Van Winkle or old Rip Van Winkle. It's all the same. Lot B. And this one's been pretty hard to find lately. Don't know why, but this one seems to be a little bit more difficult. Luckily, we got our hands on one. And we're waiting on two more to round out the whole set. So again, what Raffleworthy is, raffleworthy.com, shameless plug, is we give you the opportunity to win these full sets, plus usually some other bottles tied in with it. And that money goes back to charity. We are a professional fundraising company. So everything that we do, typically, unless there's been one or two times in between where we haven't done it, is going to involve winning this entire set, along with some other things, some cool runner-up prizes. So we don't mess around. We give you the full thing. Raffleworthy.com will tell you about our VIP program, how you can really get into all these different campaigns and really start learning about, and you'll see some stuff that we do on TikTok as well and some of our other socials that highlight some of the charities that we partner with to give back. So it's a really cool thing that we're doing that we're really proud of, able to give money back to charity while drinking some good bourbon. So check us out there. I'm gonna start just doing a little series here where I'm giving you a few facts about the Van Winkle lineup and kind of the whole story of it. If you haven't checked this book out, Pappy Land, you can buy it on Amazon. Wright Thompson, one of my favorite writers that there is out there. If you don't know who he is, if you watch golf, for instance, he's a narrator for like the Masters. He's got the real growly voice, just a really good writer. So what he did was he got with Julian Van Winkle, who currently runs this particular brand, just followed him around, I think, for like a year, maybe a little longer than that, and just kind of learned the whole story of how this all came about. So we're gonna start with a couple of tips. I made some notes from reading. I've read this book twice. By the way, I expect them to give me a little bit of a royalty on pushing their book. So the first kind of thing that I wrote down when reading through this is just understanding like how rare is Pappy Van Winkle. I know a lot, it's obviously called a unicorn. Some people have never even seen one of these bottles in person. I've been fortunate enough to obviously get my hands on a bunch through our sourcing partners that love what we're doing. I've been fortunate enough to taste everything from the 10-year all the way up to even the 25-year, the extra rare bottle. So it is good. It definitely lives up to the hype. We'll eventually probably do a review on this, but for right now, we're not touching this stuff because this is yours. So how rare is Pappy Van Winkle? So I've got some numbers here. It is a unicorn, by the way. And this is every single bottle here. When you tend to go and see it for sale, if you ever you even lay eyes on it, people are trying to ask a bunch of money for this stuff just because of the rarity, and it's just a supply and demand issue. One thing before we get into the numbers that I think is really, really cool is this distillery. Okay, so this stuff's made in Buffalo Trace, but within their own distillery, their motto for their production is at a profit if we can, at a loss if we must, but always find bourbon. I just love that. At a profit if we can, at a loss if we must, but always find bourbon. That's beautiful. Just love how that's said. 7,000 cases per year of everything is produced. That's not a lot of bourbon. So the supply is very, very low. The demand is through the roof as well for this. I don't know what the turnaround was. I think in the book it was talking about maybe back in the early 2010s or something like that, there was a huge, huge demand for this because of it just won every award at that year's whatever. So I think it's been more expensive before that, but it's just obviously taken off through the roof because of that. But 7,000 cases a year is 84,000 bottles. So split 84,000 bottles of all these different bourbons across the entire country for the entire year. So not a lot to go around, obviously. Again, we're lucky enough to get our hands on it. I think, there's a very rare occurrences where people are able to get this stuff at the retail value, which is, very low compared to the secondary market value of what this is. But typically you're having to win some sort of a lottery system to get that anyways. Again, we wanted to give you the chance to do that, hence why we're doing all of this stuff. So second fact, Julian Pappy Van Winkle, the original Julian Pappy Van Winkle, this guy, actually sold bourbon for Stitzel Weller. And he was a salesman, kind of worked his way up to where he eventually owned, I think, let me double check my notes here. I think he owned this, or became president of the Stitzel Weller distillery. And then ended up selling it in 1972. One of the really cool stories in this book talks about how when they sold this distillery, how it was revived and saved, because this stuff may not exist had it not been for a couple of rare occurrences back in that day. And what it was, and I'll just kind of read this out to you, was that distillery hit rough times. Back then, bourbon wasn't really a popular drink. Not a lot of people drank bourbon back then. Really not a lot of people have drank bourbon until the last 15, 20 years. So Stitzel Weller did them a favor and offered to buy back. They were able to buy back some bottles that had been sitting there of the Pappy Van Winkle lineup. And I believe they got some barrels and different things like that so that they could revive the recipe. And they ended up resurrecting this entire lineup. Had it not been for them being able to buy back just a couple of little things, this would have disappeared way back then. So the story of how it was revived is really cool. It's in this. There's a lot of graciousness, really, that Pappy owes to Stitzel Weller for being able to do that. And what's interesting is this stuff here, even like the 13-year rye, the 15-year, the 2023-year, obviously this stuff was bottled way back when. Back then, it wasn't even as popular as it is today. It was just probably sold at retail at that point in time. So it's interesting that when this stuff was bottled, we're not talking about the craze that we have today. Even the bottles that came out this year. So are they ever going to produce more of this to really meet the demand of us? It doesn't sound like it. It sounds like they just want to stick with their kind of break-even model and producing really fine quality whiskey. Obviously, they've got some branding and licensing things that make them a lot of money, but it's just always going to be rare. And I think that's kind of the lure of what it is. I hope that it stays that way. It allows us to keep getting our hands on some very rare fine bourbons to give back to you. But I think it just loses its luster if they go and try to mass produce this stuff. Doesn't sound like they've done that anytime soon. I know this is a long video. I will get back to you with a couple more facts that'll be a lot shorter so that we can just kind of go through a series of those just to learn more about this. So if you're ever able to get your hands on it, lucky enough to win from us, then maybe you can kind of carry these really cool stories on with that. Highly recommend the book, and we'll go from there. So those are the first two. We'll get into the next, 20 or 30 facts from here, and really appreciate your time. Again, happy to see old grandpa again. Talk to you soon.